For Amateur Jockeys to Think About by Franz Kafka. Nothing, when one considers it, can tempt one to want to be first in a race. When the orchestra strikes up, the glory of being recognized as the best rider of a particular country makes one so happy that it would be impossible to prevent remorse the next morning. The envy of opponents, cunning, fairly influential people must cause us suffering in the narrow winner's enclosure, through which we must now force ourselves on the way to the plain that it only takes a short time before was empty before us, except for a few riders whom we'd already passed, small as they rode against the edge of horizon. Many of our friends hurry off to collect their winnings and only shout their hurrah to us from over their shoulders from the distant counters. The best friends, however, have bet nothing on our horse, because they were afraid that if we had lost, they would have been angry with us. But now, because our horse finished first, and they have not won anything, they turn away when we go past, and prefer to look along the grandstands. The competitors behind us, firmly in their saddles, try to survey the misfortune that has befallen them and the injustice that has somehow been done to them. They assume a fresh appearance, as though a new race has to begin, a serious one, after this child's game. To many women, the winter appears ridiculous because he puffs, or the winner appears ridiculous because he puffs himself up and does not know what to do about the ceaseless handshaking, saluting, bowing, and greeting from a distance. The losers, in contrast, have closed their mouths and are softly patting the necks of their horses, most of which are neighing. Meanwhile, the sky becomes cloudy, and now, in addition to all the rest, it starts to rain. Siegfried Sassoon, Glory of Women. You love us when we're heroes, home on leave, or wounded in a mentionable place. You worship decorations. You believe that chivalry redeems the war's disgrace. You make us shells. You listen with delight by tales of dirt and danger, fondly thrilled. You crown our distant ardors while we fight, and mourn our laureled memories when we're killed. You believe that British troops retire when hell's last horror breaks them and they run, trampling the terrible corpses, blind with blood. O German mother dreaming by the fire, while you are knitting socks to send to your son, his face is trodden deeper in the mud. Oh, hello there. I didn't see you guys come in. Welcome to Bitcoin Talk Show. We're talking about Bitcoin and maybe a little Game of Thrones later on in the show. We'll be taking your phone calls live on Skype or on the telephone. There will be spoilers. There's going to be a spoiler alert, but we're going to try to wait until after we talk about Bitcoin and maybe a little bit about this metaphor, the idea that Bitcoin will win the Game of Thrones. The price of Bitcoin is down 4 point well, first of all, today is Monday, May 20th, 2019. My name is Thomas Hunt, and here's what's happening today in Bitcoin. The price of Bitcoin is down 4.8% in the last 24 hours, with a last of 7,791, a high of 8,269, and a low of 7,616. That's about $1 for 12,830 Satoshis, well below the 15,000 Satoshi barrier. Data shows Bitcoin has radically changed according to Forbes. Bitcoin, which has exploded back into the public consciousness, once again, now that the price has gone up, has suddenly shown everyone that it's now matured as an asset, evidenced by analysis of an increasingly complex Bitcoin and cryptocurrency conversations, mostly, a drop in fraud concerns, and people talking more about the future of Bitcoin than of the past. Bitcoin price hits all-time highs in these countries thanks to crippling fiat currencies. Once again, Bitcoin is sound money designed to show the world the mistakes of unsound money. It looks like all-time highs in Argentina and Sudan as the word about Bitcoin continues to spread around the world. That's right, it's fair money for everybody. You should get some. Bitcoin suddenly roars back. Again, Forbes, the price, which roared back over $8,000 a Bitcoin, proving once again that Bitcoin is not dead, at least for now. Hodlers gonna hodl. Most of Bitcoin supply did not move since 2018. Impressive control by the hodlers, who are likely very large hodlers if they can afford to keep their holdings and not have to move them at all. JP Morgan tries fear mongering in attempt to sabotage rowdy Bitcoin rally. Yowza. JP Morgan released a chart saying that the intrinsic value of Bitcoin is below the price. That's right, the amount of money, i.e., energy, electricity, etc., that it takes to mine Bitcoin, according to JP Morgan, determines its intrinsic value. They now believe that Bitcoin is above its intrinsic value. Nice fear mongering and sabotaging from JP Morgan. Way to go. $25,000 Bitcoin price next for permabull Tom Lee after ringing the crypto winter dead. That's right. Tom Lee has been bullish about Bitcoin the entire time, and he's sticking with it. Way to go, Tom Lee. Terrified central bank attempts to arrest Myanmar's Bitcoin binge. That's right, yet another country, Myanmar, the developing country, has shut its doors in the face of Bitcoin, a decade old. Ooh, that sounds nice. Cryptocurrency, which proposes to replace banks with a decentralized network of transaction validators and bookkeepers. That sounds accurate enough. Anybody with a decent internet connection can participate in the Bitcoin economy, which further makes it an attractive asset for people with limited gateways to participate in global economies. That's right. Bitcoin is the true breaker of chains. It is the one that will free the world. Ignorant millennials think Bitcoin can challenge gold, says CEO of US Global Investors. Well, yeah, we kind of do, right? It's a bit like Neo and the computers. He calls them up on the phone and he tells them at the end of the movie, things are going to change. Things are going to be different now. At least just 732,000 Bitcoin addresses own at least one Bitcoin. That's right. Once again, proof that if you can get your hands on one Bitcoin, suddenly $8,000 used to be about $3,000 to $5,000. Gosh, used to be $300. Seems like for the longest time. But if you can get your hands on at least one Bitcoin, you might just be okay in the future. There might be some financial viability in that investment strategy because only 732,000 addresses, not necessarily even people, own at least one Bitcoin. Remember, there are more millionaires in the world right now than there are available Bitcoin. So all of the millionaires cannot have one Bitcoin, not even just as a collector's item. Bitcoin's most important quality is its censorship resistance. Scalability will follow. You're darn right. As Trump threatens the end of Iran, its people flock to Bitcoin. Once again, this is the point of Bitcoin. This is the beauty of Bitcoin. It works around the sanctions, just like I forget, Representative Sherman was saying, Representative Brad Sherman from California was saying, Bitcoin is ruining their ability to have sanctions on Iran. Bitcoin is ruining the ability of the American currency to be the world's reserve currency, and it is. So every time this happens, the people figure out they have an alternative, they have a safety valve, such as in Venezuela, such as in Cyprus. Now we see it again in Iran. And it's not just Iran. A legendary Bitcoin guru has flipped Mark Mobius, the co-founder of Mobius Capital Partners, who once branded Bitcoin a real fraud, says, and I quote, Bitcoin will be alive and well in the future. Alive and well, there's definitely a desire amongst people around the world to be able to transfer money easily and confidentially. I believe Bitcoin and other types of currencies of that type are going to be alive and well. Alive and well. And the other story I was looking for there, currency fears drive the Chinese into Bitcoin. We've got Iran, we've got China, we've got Argentina, and we've got the Sudan. We already had Venezuela, all driving into Bitcoin. We need to start working on Bitcoin in other languages, translations, things like that. We need to spread the word about Bitcoin to everyone everywhere and then see what happens. It's the only fair thing to do. It's the only fair thing to do. I was going to talk a little bit about Bitcoin and Game of Thrones. I wanted to remind you if you guys want to call us in, I'll put the headphones on in case I get a phone call here. Although it's usually pretty loud when I get a phone call. But if you want to call us now on Skype at World Crypto Network, all one word, or at 1-518-600-1949. We're gonna try to not spoil, Game of Thrones right now, but later I am going to probably try to spoil Game of Thrones, so I'll put one of those graphics up on the screen, but, should be fair warning, we'll try to dance around it, but why will Bitcoin win the Game of Thrones? It's similar to the result in the story, and it's that Bitcoin has the best story. Bitcoin has the best character, it has the best anonymous creator, it has a fair start, and it has an immutable ledger. All of these things are tied together. The anonymous creator is something that no one else can match. Other people want money. They want fame. All right. The fact that Satoshi Nakamoto walked away from billions of dollars, he walked away from fame. They also want control, right? If you look at the Ethereum situation, what we can say is they used to have an immutable ledger, but they lost control. There's no one to go to. There's no one to even contact. So if you wanted to roll back Ethereum or some other currency, you would say, and you'd look at it and you'd say, well, you could just roll it back, right? You could call up that guy. In Bitcoin, there is no guy to call up. Other coins have had a fair start, but Bitcoin truly had the fairest start anyone could have mined. And yes, that's a pain for you. It's pain for me as well. Anyone could have bought. It's pain for you, pain for me as well, et cetera, et cetera. Everyone had the chance to read about Bitcoin. Many of us, certainly computer geeks of all stripe and color, read about it, rejected it, went on with our lives. Later on, found out about Bitcoin again, looked into it a second time, and were completely blown away. Especially when you see the kind of ecosystem that was built around Bitcoin, the different apps that allow you to use it, Coinbase, BitPay, all these things back in the day. Amazing new tools, a way to use Bitcoin. So Bitcoin has a fair start. Anyone could buy it. Anyone could mine it. Immutable ledger. And Bitcoin has the features that you want. Now they're saying in the chat, we've got some good questions here. Let's see. Let's call this incest embarrassment category. Bitcoin, because it doesn't have a creator, will not sleep with your sister. Bitcoin will also not get drunk and ruin your wedding. With these other currencies, you always have a possibility that that could happen, right? With Bitcoin, no leader, no leader to read about. Like all this stuff now with this fake Satoshi, right? This guy who says he's Satoshi but won't prove it. It's embarrassing to Bitcoin. It's embarrassing to all the people who got tied up with fake Satoshi. It's embarrassing to their reputations. It's embarrassing to Bitcoin. But that's only a false claimer. These other coins actually have creators. They actually have normal people that you can blame. So it's right there. So I think that having people to blame, having a creator makes these other currencies infinitely weaker, and it means that they will not win the Game of Thrones. I'm not seeing much action in the chat. We do have the phone lines open. They're debating whether or not Bitcoin would sleep with its sister. And once again, you cannot trust others, so trust the trustless one. Many are coming together to elect a ruler. Kind of a spoiler there, at least the lords anyway. In the same way, I think that Bitcoin is that choice. Bitcoin is the warrior king. It is the one that doesn't want to be king. It's the one that doesn't bet anyone. And part of the reason why I think everyone will come together and agree on Bitcoin is because they can't trust the other people. And we're seeing it work out with all this blockchain talk and all this. Oh, we never could trust the farmers and we could never trust the diamond reporters. And really, you still can't trust them. You're not actually verifying the data. That's not what blockchain does. But the idea that they can't trust each other and getting that idea out and going public and full scale with that is kind of the problem of the world. We can't trust people not to print money. We can't trust people to spend the money on good things. Sometimes, even when we try to spend the money on good things, we get bad outcomes anyway. So, why not trust in this bizarre digital currency invented by an anonymous creator, gifted to us on the internet? Maybe space aliens, maybe government created, all of those things. But basically, because it's our best hope, because trusting in this anonymous creator and this anonymous money that kind of had a fair start, kind of had an open ability. We all could have gotten more. We have a handle or whatever. We all have what we have, and we all wish we had more. But that's up and down. Tomorrow you could wish you had less. But who knows where it's going? It just seems when you think about Bitcoin versus the others, Bitcoin versus the altcoins, Bitcoin versus the currencies that have a creator, they're infinitely weaker. We are going to have to trust into this new world of currency that we can't control. Governments and economists and other people losing their ability to influence the currency. And we'll just have to let it happen. It'll be a simulation and we'll see what happens. We won't try to monkey with it as much, but we'll have to see. They're saying in the chat, let's see if I can get the chat here on the big board. And I will talk about Game of Thrones. I mean, I want to talk about the story and the plot and everything, but there is kind of a belief, I think, that people still haven't seen it yet. But then also, I'm not so sure. I think a lot of people have seen it and they're ready to talk about it. And if they call in, we could have a chat here. I'll add you to the conversation and we'll talk about who won, who lost, if you think it was a satisfying ending. I know without saying anything, I think it was a satisfying ending. It was very much similar to the beginning of the story. But let's see. They say, is it possible that the government created Tether so they could use it to buy lots of Bitcoin? I don't know. I like the government conspiracy theory that the government created Bitcoin and that Bitcoin has lots of Bitcoin has lots of Bitcoin, and that Satoshi's secretly a CIA agent, and he's going to come get you and take your Bitcoin. The other one I like is that Bcash was secretly a trick to get all the old Bitcoiners to move their Bitcoin around and to expose how much they had. That one seems pretty honest to me as well. Everyone moved their Bitcoins around completely, ruined their OPSEC to get a small reward. Of course, depending on your Bitcoin size, you might have gotten a laptop like I did. You might have gotten a car like other people, or maybe you bought an airplane. Who knows what you did with your Bitcoin Cash free destroy your anonymity bonus. But again, it's a calculated gain. You're going to get the free money, but you're going to expose probably how many Bitcoin you have. It probably screwed all up. But that's why Bitcoin's so difficult. If you really want to be anonymous, you can't link it to your account. You can't claim things like Bcash while they're worth lots of money. And that's the thing. So they say Jeremy disagrees about the government getting Tether. They probably could have bought Ether instead or other shit coins. And certainly the government could have made a lot of money investing or even manipulating in the altcoins and the Bitcoin markets. But we don't know that they did. They are saying maybe that Myanmar or some of the central banks are doing it. Oh, General Byzantian writes in the chat, he says, so when will Bitcoin start eating the offspring it doesn't want, like a male gibbon chief eating babies by other males? How can we ensure that Bitcoin gets the features from the experimental chains? Well, I do think we're going to get some of the features. Some of the features are not adaptable to Bitcoin. The strange way that they started Zcash with all of those laptops, and they had a ceremony, and they created the magical crypto keys, and then they smashed all the laptops, and they smashed all the hard drives. Oh, well, we can't do that on Bitcoin because we've already started, right? So, I do think a lot of the new features are going to be added into Bitcoin, and that Bitcoin itself will be the development ground for these new features, as we've seen things like SegWit be adopted on Bitcoin, and the ability of Bitcoin to be more than just a single layer, but multiple layers, and a lot of complexity and a lot of side chains and a really universal transaction structure, a much bigger thing than it used to be. I think we've seen Bitcoin expand in that direction. Some of the other coins may be useful, but I do think we will adapt their features. Jeremy wants to know if I've seen Anderson Cooper Bitcoin episode or the 60 Minutes Bitcoin episode. I haven't seen those yet. All I've seen is Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones, Game of Thrones. I'm not sure if it's time to go into spoilers. People don't seem that interested about talking about Game of Thrones in the chat or talking about Bitcoin, but we are a little late this morning. This isn't our normal time because I had to watch Game of Thrones. For you guys who don't know, it's the final season of Game of Thrones, the epic book series by George R. R. Martin, at first adapted into an epic TV show with all the slow pacing that you expect from a novel, and heavy and weighty novel with hundreds of characters and dozens of locations. Then, as they ran out of books and the TV show outpaced the books, it quickly became let's write to the finish. So, if you like writing to the finish, that's been Game of Thrones the last couple of seasons. And without really going into spoilers, the ending, if you haven't seen the last episode, maybe you've only seen the ones building up to it, they're moving their pieces to get them to the ending. This character's got to be there. This character's got to be here. This has to happen. They have a big checklist, and they're just checking off things. So it feels a little rushed. It feels a little cramped, but it's a good ending in the end. I think we have no choice. We're going to go into spoilers. If you haven't seen Game of Thrones, the last episode, if you haven't seen it at all and you're curious in watching it and you don't want it spoiled, you can turn it off now. We'll probably just do a little Game of Thrones, talk about the ending in mainly a literary way. So I don't think that it would directly spoil it, but if you need the surprise and the emotion, uh, pause the show, come back later, watch Game of Thrones, and then come back. All right, so we're going to talk about Game of Thrones. We are accepting donations here as well. We're 23% towards our goal of sending mad Bitcoins to Germany to do more interviews right here on the World Crypto Network. You can scan the Bitcoin QR code right now. That would be great. And oh, there's no Game of Thrones streaming yet in Canada, so the general will be muting. He wants his crypto to be fast in small amounts with no spam and yet still secure. That sounds pretty good. I think that also censorship resistant is the big one there. It's all about the ability to spend money on what you want to spend it on. And we'd like to thank our donors who sent us 200,000 Satoshis, 636,000 Satoshis, 83,000 Satoshis, 614,000 Satoshis. And if you would just scan that QR code right now, send us a donation. We've raised $234 towards our goal of $1,000. And Jeremy is saying there are ways around borders. But let's just talk some Game of Thrones. Mainly, I'm doing this because it's just fresh in my head, and it's all I want to talk about. And I don't really have the right friend group around me right now of people that are watching Game of Thrones in an addictive and obsessive fashion, like I'm sure some of you guys are. So um, let's get to it. All right, we've got some people here, at least in the chat. We're going to chat with you guys. Remember, we're past the spoilers alert. We told everybody it's on now. So what do I think? Let's talk basic outline. Well, we're talking bookends here, right? Game of Thrones, George R. R. Martin, he's a classicist. He has ended the books. Let's give him credit for better or for worse for this ending. I believe they were following his notes and that they just followed his notes to the end of the story. So I'm going to give him credit for this ending and the main choices. There are smaller characters that he still needs to move around if he even bothers to write the other books. But let's give him credit for the ending. This is his baby. This is their show. So Game of Thrones, the ending is like the beginning. Here we go. Big spoilers. Okay, major events. Cersei and Jaime are indeed dead in the tunnel. Tyrion, the dwarf, walks there and finds his brother and sister in their ancestral arms together. Tragic and sad ending. Clearly, Tyrion loved Jaime. Maybe he loved Cersei too. He tried to save her. He freed Jaime. He betrayed Queen Cersei. He's about to be put to death. He's lamenting it with Jon Snow, saying that Varys was right, that they should have stopped the Dragon Queen before she burned King's Landing. Then after that, Jon betrays Daenerys, stabs her in the belly. It could take over the army there by a lot of standards. If you kill the queen, you should become the king. But Jon is then arrested. A council of lords meets, decides on who should become the next king. They choose Bran. Bran, the one who didn't want to be king, who was thrown out of the window in the very first scene of the books with Jaime Lannister doing the throwing. Everything all comes back together. The knife that was supposed to be murdering Bran, framed Tyrion. Everything all just comes back to that very first scene in the books. We see the Starks ascendant. Bran is the king. A major power move by Sansa, keeping the North. A little echo of Elizabeth the First there, don't you think? The royal English queen. The North basically becomes England at this point, or UK, whatever you want to say. Separate from the EU, never quite joining, letting the six kingdoms, France, Germany, etc., join together and deal with their problems. I think it was a pretty satisfying ending. Jon is sent to the North, to the Night Watch as punishment for murdering the queen. It seems kind of fair. It was tough to say that he could just go on, or that he could become king of the North, or he could become king of the kingdoms, or whatever. Bran doesn't want to be king. Tyrion doesn't want to be hand. They show a scene at the end with kind of business going on as usual. Sam has taken over the religious order. Uh, Pretty moving and emotional scene, I thought, when Brienne of Tarth, who's now the Golden Knight, when she was writing Jaime's history into the book, and she writes Jaime out as a hero. She completely writes Jaime out as a hero. He died protecting his queen. And just a really romantic and beautiful ending for Jaime there, written out as a hero in the book. Jon takes the flock of Northlings, or wildlings to the north, and that's the end of that there. Again, a refreshing, a spring. The wildlings are returning. They didn't do a little spoiler, or a little like. I felt very much we're talking about cycles here. We're talking about breaking the wheel. Buddhist symbolism here. The chains, the wheel. I was looking at Grey Wolf's or Grey Worm. I was looking at his logo there around his neck, the Ouroboros. It looked like there was an animal eating another animal. The circle, the cycle of this, all of the chains, like the one that Sansa was wearing with the big large chain, the maesters and the chains, all of the circles. So we get a circular ending, and it's but yeah, they didn't spoil it. They didn't have zombies or something happen. I kind of thought Jon Snow might have become the next Night King, and that he would have been attacked the way that their cousin, the early Stark in the beginning. It's hard to remember his name, but Jalen Stark, something like that. But the way he was attacked, and then he became kind of half human, half monster, still good enough to be a Deus Ex Machina to save Jon Snow there. So John, Richard says John goes to live with the free folk. I'm not sure. I think he was just leading them north. I think he goes back to the wall, and where he's supposed to be leading the Night's Watch. I see him as kind of a symbolism to old Mormont there. Uh, Jonah, Jorah, the elder Mormont, who was in charge of the Night King, the castles and such. But we didn't get a comeback of the Night King, because you want to have that. There's a little bit of a tease there where, like, shouldn't they have to come together again? Isn't this going to happen again? Is this like the Matrix, where the story keeps happening and looping over and over again? Going to the chat, let's see what you guys thought about it. Let me know in the chat also if you wanna call in. Right now, obviously, we're mainly talking about Game of Thrones, so everyone is qualified to have an opinion on this. Nobody's right or wrong, and we already put the spoiler alert up, so people know. Let's see. Jeremy says Anderson Cooper gets sent to the Night Watch. I don't know. He might like that. Not taking a wife is not a large penalty for him. Spoilers. Let's see. Let's see. Byzantium says there's Game of Thrones on Crave, but it's 720, barely stereo, and it's a terrible company. So, yeah, you've got the 1080p one looks really nice. Very crispy ending. Certainly, all the effects look good. The dragon, the dire wolf. It was nice to see the old wolf in there. Also, I didn't talk much about Arya. Arya was kind of my pick to be the winner. I had Arya and Gendry. Remember Gendry, the son of Robert Baratheon? He had a strong claim, I thought, but he didn't win, and they didn't win together. Arya, too much of a faceless one to join a kind of a grounded world with Gendry and to be the lady to his lord. She goes off to the lands to the west of Westeros, which is very much, I thought, a reference to Frodo here. We're always going to be talking about Lord of the Rings when we're talking about Game of Thrones, and Frodo, as the elves and kind of the magic, they leave Middle Earth. That at the end, that was a big, powerful moment there. Let's see. Johnny says, "I believe the death of the Night King caused Bitcoin to go up because people started speculating that life is going to exist." That is pretty good metaphor. It did time up well, with what seems to be the end of crypto winter, and of course, this, metaphor of spring. Arya shattering the Night King, stabbing him with the obsidian, dragon glass dagger, brought us spring, and, maybe it brought Bitcoin spring as well. It's funny, though, to see once again how Bitcoin is so motivated by the price, and, even though we're back halfway maybe to where we were, and people probably have half or less than half of what they used to have, because it's so hard to hold through these dark, dark times, especially when you need to pay bills and things. But uh, it's amazing. People are really the price turns, and then they're like, "Oh yeah, Bitcoin's cool again." We kind of do need this approval from the popular crowd. Something about our little experiment. It only works not only if the network keeps working, but kind of if the price either maintains or goes up. I'm not sure why that is. So pretty interesting. Let's see. BTC Socialist thinks that Arya was joining the Men of the West, and that maybe it was a Masonic thing that they're saying. I think they're mainly talking about the New World, the undiscovered country. Remember, we have the East is the old world here with the bankers and the slavers, and the place where Daenerys kind of comes from after she's banished from Westeros, and she comes back to the West, which is really it's a lot of England, I think. We're talking about English writers, we're talking about, uh, Lord of the Rings, we're talking about Tolkien, we're talking about people who are obsessed with Tolkien, so we're always gonna be talking about England here. And yeah, she brings these ideas of the East. She brings the end of the slave revolution. She brings kind of the end of the banks, the end of sell swords, the end of this golden company, this great army that Cersei Lannister bought to protect her castle, just completely wrecked by the dragon, the new technology of the dragon, that Daenerys was able to yield these nuclear weapons and to destroy whole cities and really to bring the peasants and the normal people onto the board. Sure, they'd be onto the board if they were in a factory or some kind of thing you wanted to destroy, but she really brought them onto the board and showed us the power and the horror of nuclear weapons. And that in a lot of ways, John says, we can't have that. That we're not ready for that. And her little Hitler speech there at the end, I thought that was good. I thought it was a big emotional turning point. Remember, what we're really talking about here is Tyrion and Jon and Varys and the rest of the people really, although they didn't have as much of a choice as I'd say those three, but they backed Daenerys. They believed that she was the good Targaryen. She was not the one that would, just, light someone on fire and make them dance in front of her. And then she did. She fried Samuel Tarwell's Tarley, fried his parents and his brother, that destroyed, obviously family, ruined. She fried King's Landing, probably because, Cersei murdered her worker there, Melisandre, her best friend. I think I'm messing them up. That's probably the Lord of Light lady, but, you get it. The, Miri, her friend from Noth. It was neat to see the Unsullied were going back to Noth. Presumably, they're gonna free it. They're gonna relax on the beach. They're gonna chill. Although they were sure ready for the war at the end, banging their staffs, ready to roll. Pretty interesting to see the coalition of, Queen Daenerys, the, barbarians, the Drogos, the riding around in the, center there celebrating, and the way the Unsullied celebrated. The Unsullied celebrated by banging their staffs once. Not a very emotional people, the Unsullied. And, then the brutal response, with, Queen, Daenerys having the Lannisters and others just murdered in the street. Very brutal change in Cersei or in, Daenerys there, and you see Jon Snow and, Tyrion and others have to take action to try to stop us, so, Varys was right. Varys was right, the spider, saw it coming. But think that's about it for our Game of Thrones, spoilers edition here. Anything else you guys wanna say in the chat? Have you thought that maybe, Game of Thrones was better than you thought now that you're thinking about the bookends and the way that it ends about the Starks? The power of the Starks in the beginning. I remember the early scenes of the first book. It seems like classic literature now, but the first book, in the very first scene that happens with Bran, and you just wanna throw the book across the room. You just wanna give it up, and then now for everything to come back full circle. But you see that chapter in the beginning, all the Starks are together, all the family is happy, and then you see Game of Thrones rip the family apart, tear them all over the world, all kinds of leadership positions, all kind of failures, successes, Theon Greyjoy, all these kind of things, and, then we come back to the end, Jon Snow back to the wall, Sansa, Queen of the North, Tyrion, Hand of the King, and Bran the Broken becomes Bran the Builder once again. And, there was in the epic lore of Game of Thrones, there was an older king called Bram the Builder. I think that's who Bram was named after. There's a lot of Bram being thrown from the tower, Bram representing masonry, man. Bram is like the link to the olden times. He's a brick. He's a brick in the wall. And, I think that's about it for Game of Thrones. Enjoyed talking about it with you guys. If you want to let me know in the comments, if you agreed with me, if you disagreed with me, if you think it was a good ending or a bad ending. Remember to donate to our Bitcoin drive here. We're going to send mad Bitcoins to Germany. We're going to go to Blockchain Hotel. If you're in Essen, Germany, or near there, you should sign up with code MAD Bitcoins 25. Check that out. Then we're going to Breaking Bitcoin in Amsterdam. And finally, the Unchained Conference in Berlin. We're going to be talking about the Lightning Network and Bitcoin. So thanks so much for joining us. Be sure to give us a thumbs up and a share. Subscribe down below if you haven't already. And leave us a comment. What did you think about Game of Thrones? Until next time, bye bye.